Let me tell you about a compound in Ibadan. Not the fine type of compound with flowers and painted gates. This one was the kind where rooms stood in a long line like tired soldiers. Tenants lived door to door, sharing the same bathrooms, the same water tap, and the same problems. But the real problem in that compound was not the building. The problem was the owner. Her name was Alhaja Rukayat, a short, round woman with a loud voice and a heart that many people believed was made of stone. If you lived in that compound, you did not need a clock. Once you heard the sound of her slippers hitting the ground, kpa, 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 everybody already knew trouble was moving around. Some people said she was not always like that, but nobody in the compound had ever seen the other version of her. The Alhaja they knew was strict like a headmistress and stubborn like a goat that refused to leave the road. Her rules were many. First rule, rent must never be late. In that compound, tenants did not wait for the last day. If your rent was to due next week, Alhaja had already started reminding you. Second rule, the gate. Once it was 9 o'clock in the night, the gate would be locked. It did not matter whether you were coming from work, from church, from mosque, or from your grandmother's burial. 9 o'clock was 9 o'clock. Anybody outside after that time should start looking for where to sleep. Then there was the water matter. Water in that compound was like gold. If Alhaja suspected that someone wasted water, she could lock the tap for everybody. Once she did that, tenants would carry buckets and begin the long journey to fetch water outside the street. The toilets were not safe either. If she woke up in a bad mood and felt the place was dirty, she could simply lock it. And when Alhaja locked something, nobody begged her successfully. So the tenants lived carefully, very carefully. People closed taps like they were handling eggs. They swept the compound as if an inspector was coming. And by evening, everybody was already calculating how to enter the gate before 9. But even with all that, Alhaja still found reasons to shout. Her voice was one the whole street recognized. Sometimes, early in the morning, when people were still stretching on their beds, her voice would already be flying across the compound. "Who left this place dirty?" Or, "Who used this bucket?" Or, "Who touched my tap?" The tenants had learned one secret. Whenever Alhaja started shouting, the best thing to do was mind your business. That compound had many types of people living inside it. There was a mechanic who came home smelling of engine oil every night. There were 2 students who read late into the night. A young mother lived there with her little boy who ran around the compound like a small goat. Then there was Sade. Sade sold food by the roadside not far from the compound. She was a quiet person who mostly kept to herself. Every morning she carried her cooler outside to sell rice and stew. In the evening she returned tired but grateful for the little money she made. Unlike some other tenants, Sade rarely had trouble with the landlady. Now, the strange thing about Alhaja was this. The same woman that tenants feared was also known as a very religious person. She prayed regularly. Her prayer mat was never far from her. On Fridays, she dressed in fine clothes and went to the mosque proudly. Anyone who met her outside the compound would greet her with respect and think she was a calm woman. But inside her compound, tenants knew another story. And so life continued like that. Days passed, weeks passed. The tenants woke up, went to work, returned early, avoided trouble, and prayed not to hear their name in Alhaja's voice. That evening, as people sat outside their rooms enjoying the cool air, someone mentioned something important. The month of Ramadan was close. For many Muslims, that month was a time for fasting, prayer, patience, and kindness. People tried to control their anger. People tried to forgive others. People tried to soften their hearts. But in that compound, when the tenants heard the news, some of them just laughed quietly. because they were thinking about only one person, Alhaja Rukayat. One of the men there shook his head slowly and said something that made others smile. He said if Ramadan could change that woman, then truly miracles still happened in this world. The others laughed again. To them, it sounded impossible. Anybody who stayed there for more than 6 months had already learned 3 things. Wake up early, mind your business, and never test Alhaja's patience. Take the matter of water, for example. One morning, before sunrise, a student named Bola rushed to fetch water before going to school. In her hurry, she did not close the tap properly. Water kept dripping slowly. Unfortunately, Alhaja woke up early that day. By the time she stepped outside and saw the tap, the compound already knew trouble had arrived. Within minutes, her voice filled the air. Everybody quietly opened their doors just a little, peeping to see what had happened. Before long, the tap was locked. For 5 days. Tenants began carrying buckets from a nearby street like a small procession. Some people complained under their breath, but nobody dared face Alhaja. They simply endured. Then there was the famous gate incident people still talked about. A young man named Kunle worked in a restaurant across town. His work often ended late at night. One unlucky evening, he returned a few minutes after 9. The gate was already locked. Kunle knocked gently at first, hoping Alhaja might still open it. But that night, the compound remained quiet. Then he knocked again, begging in loud, scared voice. Alhaja come out slowly, and Kunle thought she would open the gate, but she simply add another padlock to the gate and hiss before walking away. By morning, he was still outside the gate, sitting on a wooden bench near the entrance. When tenants started coming out, they saw him stretching his back like someone who hadn't slept well. Nobody needed explanation. Everyone already understood. After that day, Kunle started returning home very early. Even when his work had not finished, the toilets had their own history also. One afternoon, Alhaja inspected the place and did not like what she saw. Without saying much, she simply locked the doors. Just like that, for 4 days. Tenants had to start looking for toilets in nearby compounds. Some people even woke up before sunrise just to avoid embarrassment. The stories from those 4 days became jokes people whispered about whenever Alhaja wasn't around. Yet the strange thing was this. Despite all her strictness, Alhaja was still known as a woman who feared God. Every Friday, she went to the mosque. It confused many of them, because the woman they saw praying was not the same woman who locked toilets and taps without mercy. Among the tenants, the person who noticed this contradiction the most was Sade. Sade watched people carefully. She noticed how the landlady prayed sincerely, yet lost her temper quickly with tenants. But Sade kept her thoughts to herself. She simply continued her daily routine. Wake up early, cook food for sale, return home before night, avoid trouble. That was the safest way to live in that compound. But one evening, something happened that people would remember for a long time. A small boy who lived in the compound was playing football with other children. As children usually do, the ball flew in the wrong direction, straight into Alhaja's window. The sound of breaking glass echoed across the compound. Silence followed immediately. Every child froze. Every adult slowly turned toward the window. Moments later, the door of Alhaja's room opened. She stepped outside slowly, looking at the broken glass. The children stood there like goats waiting for a farmer's decision. No one spoke. Everyone expected shouting. That was the normal thing. But that day, something strange happened. Alhaja simply looked at the ball on the ground, then at the frightened children. She shook her head and went back inside. No shouting, no punishment. The compound remained silent long after she closed the door. Some tenants even looked at each other in confusion.
It was the first time many of them had seen Alhaja ignore something like that. Nobody knew the reason, but what they didn't realize was that the next week something important was about to begin, the month of Ramadan. The incident was the topic of the week. They were all shocked and think that Alhaja had truly changed, until one morning.
In the compound lived a man called Baba Tunde. He was not a young man anymore. He worked as a bus conductor, the kind that shouted bus stops from morning till evening. His work was not easy, and the money was never steady. But Baba Tunde was known as a calm person. One afternoon, he returned home looking tired. That day, his wife had fallen sick in their village, and most of the little money he had saved had already been sent to help her. Unfortunately, his house rent was also close to expiring. And everyone in that compound knew one thing. Alhaja did not joke with rent. By evening, word had already reached her that Baba Tunde's rent had not been paid. She did not wait until morning. Her slippers sounded across the compound as she walked straight to his door. Pa, pa, pa. Once tenants heard that sound, they quietly paid attention. Alhaja knocked on the door firmly. Baba Tunde came out, looking worried. Alhaja reminded him about the rent. Baba Tunde explained that he needed a little more time. Just a few days, he said. His voice was calm, but anyone could see he was struggling. But Alhaja was not the type who liked explanations. She listened quietly, then shook her head. Rules were rules. Before anyone could fully understand what was happening, she ordered him to move his things out of the room until the rent was paid, and she only gave him 1 week to pay. The compound became silent. Some tenants watched from their doorways, others pretended to mind their business but still listened carefully. Baba Tunde tried to plead again, but the decision had already been made. By nightfall, some of his belongings had been placed outside his door. A thin mattress, a small bag of clothes, a cooking pot. It was not a pleasant sight. Sade watched everything from a distance. She felt uncomfortable seeing an older man treated that way, especially knowing he had not refused to pay. He had simply asked for a little time. But nobody spoke. That night, the compound felt different. People moved around quietly. Even the usual evening conversations were fewer. Some tenants shook their heads and said nothing. Others simply prayed they never face such a situation. And that night, Alhaja returned to her room believing she had done nothing wrong. To her, she was only protecting her property. The next morning, the compound woke up earlier than usual. Doors opened quietly. Buckets touched the ground as people prepared their early meal. Ramadan had begun. For those who were fasting, the early morning meal was important. It was the food that would carry them through the long hours of the day. In the compound, some tenants ate quickly before the first call to prayer. Others sat quietly, already preparing their minds for the day of fasting. Among them was Sade. She woke early, ate a small meal, and prayed before getting ready for her work. Even Alhaja woke up early that morning. From her room, the quiet sound of her prayers could be heard again. Anyone passing by would think she was a woman fully devoted to worship. And in truth, Alhaja took Ramadan seriously. She fasted every year. She prayed often during the month. Later that morning, as people prepared to leave for work, they saw Baba Tunde sitting beside his belongings again. He had managed to spend the night in the corridor, resting against the wall. A few tenants greeted him gently.
He only nodded and forced a small smile. Nobody mentioned the matter openly, but everyone knew the situation was uncomfortable. Sade quietly placed a small plate of food beside him before leaving for her store. It was food she had cooked the night before. Baba Tunde thanked her softly. The day went on as usual. Alhaja decided to attend a short Ramadan lecture at the mosque near the street. It was something she sometimes did during the fasting period. The mosque was not far, and many people from the neighborhood gathered there to listen to reminders about faith and good character. That evening, the mosque was filled with people sitting quietly. The imam began speaking in a calm voice. He spoke about patience. He spoke about forgiveness. Then he spoke about something that made many listeners think deeply. He said fasting was not only about avoiding food and water. It was also about controlling anger, showing mercy, and helping those who were struggling. The mosque was very quiet while he spoke. Some people lowered their heads. Others listened carefully. Alhaja also sat among them, listening. The imam continued his reminder. He spoke about how Allah loved those who showed kindness, especially in the month of Ramadan. He spoke about how helping someone in difficulty could bring blessings greater than many acts of worship. Then he mentioned something that stayed in Alhaja's mind. He said sometimes the test of a person's heart is not in big things, but in small opportunities to show mercy. When the lecture ended, Alhaja also walked home slowly that evening. When she entered the compound, she noticed something again. Baba Tunde was sitting in the same place beside his small mattress and bag. For a moment, she stopped walking. Her mind briefly returned to the words she had heard in the mosque, and something changed in her mind. Then she called him. Not loudly, just once. Baba Tunde slowly stood up and walked towards her. The tenants nearby pretended not to watch, but everybody was paying attention. Alhaja spoke to him for a few seconds. No one heard exactly what she said. But soon after, something surprising happened. She asked him to carry his things back inside his room. Just like that. No long speech, no argument. The man looked confused at first, but he did not waste time. Within minutes, his mattress and bag were back inside the room. From different doorways, tenants exchanged silent looks. Nobody said anything, but everyone was thinking the same thing. Something had changed.
One evening during iftar, something even more surprising happened. Alhaja prepared a large pot of food in her room. When the call to prayer was close, she sent one of the children in the compound to call a few tenants. At first, people were confused, but soon bowls of food began leaving her room and moving across the compound. Rice, stew, dates, pap. She shared the food with several tenants so they could break their fast together. That evening, the compound was filled with quiet gratitude. Many people were too surprised to even speak. Even Baba Tunde, who had suffered the most earlier, received a bowl of food. He accepted it respectfully. For the first time in many years, people sat outside their rooms after iftar and talked peacefully without fear of hearing Alhaja's angry voice. Children played freely in the open space. The air felt lighter. Sade watched everything quietly. She had always believed that a person's heart could change. Now she was seeing it happen. Of course, Alhaja had not completely abandoned her rules. The compound was still expected to remain clean. Tenants still needed to respect the property. But something inside her had softened. Her voice was calmer. Her decisions were kinder. And slowly, the tenants began to relax around her. By the middle of Ramadan,
People were no longer whispering about the change. They were seeing it clearly. The woman they once feared had started behaving like someone else, someone who still valued order, but now also showed mercy. And though nobody said it directly, many people knew what had started the change. The reminders of Ramadan, the prayers, the sermons, the quiet reflection that the holy month often brings. One afternoon, Alhaja called a few tenants together in the open space of the compound. That alone surprised everyone. Usually, when Alhaja gathered people, it meant someone had broken a rule. But this time, there was no anger in her voice. She simply stood there and spoke calmly. She told them that during Ramadan, she had spent many nights thinking about her actions and the way she had treated people who lived under her roof. She admitted that she had been too harsh. The tenants looked at one another in quiet surprise. Hearing those words from her felt almost unreal. Alhaja continued speaking. She said Ramadan had reminded her that life was not only about money and rules. A person could pray every day, but if their heart lacked mercy, then something important was missing. So, she had decided to do something. First, she told Baba Tunde that he could take his time with the remaining part of his rent. No pressure. Just settle it when things improved. The older man nodded gratefully. Then, she turned to the rest of the tenants and made another announcement. For that month, she would reduce part of the rent for everyone. Just a little help so people could manage their expenses during the difficult times. The compound became very quiet. Nobody expected such a decision. Some tenants even thought they had misheard her. But Alhaja was not finished. A few days later, the night before the end of Ramadan, she prepared food again. This time, it was not only for a few people. She cooked a large meal and invited everyone in the compound to gather together after breaking the fast. That evening, the compound felt different from any other night people had experienced there. Food was shared, people laughed, children played freely in the open space. Sade remembered the days when tenants whispered complaints behind their doors. Now, those same tenants were smiling and chatting together. And in the middle of it all was Alhaja, not shouting, not inspecting anything, just sitting peacefully among the people who lived in her compound. When Ramadan finally ended and the celebration of Eid arrived, the compound was filled with greetings and joy. Tenants visited one another's rooms, food moved from house to house. Even those who once feared the landlady now greeted her warmly. And Alhaja responded with a smile many people had never seen before. From that time onward, people in the neighborhood still knew her as a strict woman who liked order in her compound. But they also knew something else. Her heart had softened. And the compound that once feared her had become a place where people could live with a little more peace. Because sometimes, all it takes to change a person is a moment of reflection during a sacred time. A reminder that kindness, patience, and mercy are also part of faith. And when that reminder truly reaches the heart, even the hardest habits can begin to change. The end. Thank you for watching to the end. We promise to deliver a good story every week. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you love stories like this, do well to check Tales by Adejoke for more. Thank you.